Breath of the Wild, a game so greatly received by so many, tens across the board, a true masterpiece came from Nintendo in 2017 after spending 7 years in development. And there's one big thing we'll be focusing on today, the Great Plateau. An opening so good that it puts you right into the world perfectly. The Great Plateau did everything just so amazingly, introducing the character, the gameplay, environment, and the story, all in a way that's just so fitting in the vibe of the game. You could tell so much thought was put into the design of this segment, and it just really thrived from it. But for the next little while, we'll be diving into why and what exactly makes this game's opening segment so good. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first time Link opens his eyes, he gets brought into the light. Just like the player, he has no knowledge of where he is or whose voice he's hearing. This is where the connection between the player and Link starts. Throughout this segment, you learn many different ways the world works. You take on a whole bunch of information about who you are and what happened 100 years ago. Having Link and the player have this kind of relationship really brings the two connected. From the moment you step into Hyrule, you start to feel like you are Link. Breath of the Wild made this connection in such a simple yet effective way. Every interaction with the old man and every item you pick up is now the player and Link's experience. For Breath of the Wild to take this approach makes it very different from most games, but also very different from other games in the franchise. Ocarina of Time. You wake up as a boy who was in the forest, already had lived out 9 years of his life, but your only experience with him is the adventure in which he is destined to complete. Twilight Princess, you're a farm boy that is well known around his town and has already lived 17 years of his life. Yet again, you're just setting on another quest he's been destined to fulfill, but in Breath of the Wild, it's like you're reborn. Each act you do throughout the game is to regain knowledge and learn how the world works around you, making Link closer to the player more than ever. You wake up as Link in the Shrine of Resurrection. Not a clue to where you are, the camera zooms in on a pedestal, giving you direction without directly telling you where to go. You walk up to the pedestal, and this already teaches you your main way to interact with the world around you. You examine the pedestal and pick up your first major item, the Sheikah Slate. You get shown a brief description of the item and get told that Link finds something familiar about it. This not only shows how you'll be learning about new equipment, powers, weapons, any sort of item throughout the game, it also gets the player's mind moving and spikes the curiosity to find out what's going on. The door opens, you find 2 chests. This introduces another major way you'll be getting useful items throughout the game, as well as making sure you fully grasp that the A button is your action button. You now learn how to open your inventory and equip items, and once again, you'll go up to the pedestal, and that will remind you how important that Sheikah Slate is to your access to certain areas on your adventure. Another set of door opens, and you get introduced to the light. The player goes forward, and the last thing you learn before being introduced to the world is another main way of traversal, how to climb. This shows that you can climb surfaces given enough stamina. Once you reach the top of that rock, the player and Link at the same time run into their first introduction of Hyrule, showing its vast scale and all there is to explore, getting the player's brain going by showing some key landmarks such as Hyrule Castle, the volcano by Goron City, and the vast Hyrule Field. But then it cuts to the old man, who walks back to his shelter and gives the player free roam, but still giving a sort of direction on where to head. After you exchange some words with the old man, you'll start collecting items, and the only interruption that you'll experience in the entire game will happen right now. The voice teaches you about how the Sheikah Slate can also double down as a map and a guide for your journey. After this brief interruption, you can head anywhere you want, but now you're more incentivized to keep things moving. You'll make your way through some bokoblins and to a pedestal covered by rock, almost in a cave type structure. Here you are once again examining the pedestal and are shown how your Sheikah Slate affects your access to the world around you. You then get knocked down and brought up into the sky and shown that many more towers are popping up around the map. You see that it downloads the region's information and puts it on your map, demonstrating to the player how beneficial these towers will be on your journey. After that, you're given insight on what the voice wants and learn more about what happened to Link. This is the first time you learn how long you've been asleep for, and you also find out who Calamity Ganon is. The old man will grab your attention once more as you reach the ground, and you're now told about the treasure that lives on this plateau. He points you to a shrine that becomes your first point of interest, and that shrine will also introduce you to the Slate abilities. The old man will tell you in exchange for the treasure in the shrine, he will trade you the paraglider. These will require the player to experiment and learn how the abilities work, given multiple situations and how to use them and how they will be useful throughout your journey. This brings us to the first shrine, being the Magnesis Shrine. After going through several puzzles that show you how to utilize this brand new tool you just discovered, you get introduced to the treasure you'll be finding at the end of each shrine. And this treasure is the Spirit Orb. You're told that it holds some power and then it absorbs into your soul. You make it back up to the surface, and to the right, you'll actually see a metal box you can move with magnesis, as well as a chest hidden in the pond that you can pull out for some loot. The old man will come back down and then request that you get 3 more shrines done in exchange for his paraglider. He tells you to go back on top of the tower, and once again, while you're up there, teaches you another important exploration tool, which is making pins with now your scope of the Sheikah Slate. Doing this lets you keep track and mark things on your journey that you may want to explore or come back to later. He tells you to ping the 3 shrines across the plateau and make your way to them after that. Now that you've done all of this, the order in which you complete these shrines is completely up to you. Now with each of these 3 shrines, there are different lessons leading up to them, and some of these don't even include the abilities that you'll obtain from them. For example, the bomb shrine will highlight how you can explode cracked surfaces, and there are plenty around the maze that surrounds the shrine, but it will also introduce to you the very powerful foe that is the Guardian. Then the Karana shrine will teach you that there are multiple ways to get around environments in this world. You can either cook meals, you can do quests to obtain an item that'll help you, or you could just use basic nature principles such as lighting a flame on a torch. Once you finally get into that shrine, you'll learn about the specialties of the ability, and then once again, right by the shrine, there's a real world application to get the chest as well. The last one you'll encounter is the Stasis Shrine. In this shrine, you'll get taught the core mechanics of the stasis abilities, demonstrating how it can freeze time, how you can build up force in objects to either solve puzzles, access new areas and secrets, or maybe even fight some enemies. And then get this, once you exit that shrine, there's going to be a rock on top of a chest. You're going to use stasis to build up force on this rock, move it, therefore showing another real world application of one of these abilities. Once you complete that last shrine, the old man will visit you outside and tell you to meet him at the Temple of Time. He then phases away and you make your way up there. Once you arrive in the Temple of Time, you'll see the goddess statue is now glowing. You learn that for every 4 shrines you complete, or every 4 spirit orbs you get a choice of either a heart container or a stamina vessel. Once you decide on that, the old man will tell you to come up to the roof of the structure and then reveal himself as Rome Bosphorus. Yeah, I can't pronounce that. AKA the Fallen King of Hyrule. He will then teach you more about Link's history, how the champions failed, and how Link is now destined on a path to stop Calamity Ganon. He points you to a town called Kakariko Village, and finally gives you the paraglider. And that pretty much is it for the scripted part of the Great Plateau, in which now you're free to jump off the land, use that glider, and continue on your new adventure. Now this section really teaches you a lot of major components about the game, like inventory management, how to obtain better gear, and it really teaches the player the value of exploration. Now there's a couple things I didn't mention during that segment, like how there's a whole boss fight with a stone talus in the forest section, which you don't even have to visit. I'll talk more about those details though in our environment section. Throughout the plateau, you'll learn a lot about how the game works, and just learn a lot about the game's core mechanics. The first big one you'll find out, as I've mentioned before, is the power of the Sheikah Slate. The Sheikah Slate plays such a big important part of this game. It acts as your gateway to new areas, your way to obtain as well as use new abilities, and it's your main source of navigation. Next you get a glimpse of stamina, walking right out that Shrine of Resurrection, and then throughout the plateau as you're adventuring, how your life could so easily be taken or be hard to keep up. You start to learn how vital both of those aspects are throughout this trial. And once you get to the end where you talk to the goddess statue and she tells you that she can increase both those traits for you, you fully grasp the importance of shrines and why you're going to want to keep completing them throughout the game. Another big mechanic you discover during this segment is how to cook and what cooking meals would do to you. You learn that you can figure out recipes to make either hearty meals or recipes that make environmental effects go away or become less effective. This kind of gets the player to almost treat the game like a collectathon because there isn't a cap of how many ingredients you can have in your inventory. And yeah, I did briefly mention it, but this does a really good job of highlighting the weather effects and how different environments can affect you throughout the game. Almost half the plateau is cold and brisk. This makes getting the warm doublet or making a bunch of spicy spicy pepper meals, so much more worth it just to explore this section of the area. And there are plenty more places like this in the rest of the game, so going through this lets you know that there are multiple solutions to one issue. Another really large one would be the combat. The plateau teaches you how to lock onto targets, pick up weapons, weapon durability, normal attacks, sneak attacks, dodging, quick equipping, archery, shield sliding, and the list just kind of keeps going with this one. Then one small one, but still very important one, would be that the game has a day and night cycle. You'll learn that new enemies start spawning on you at night, but that's the only really big significance you'll learn while experiencing on the plateau, because blood moons aren't introduced for a while after that. The Great Plateau has to introduce the Breath of the Wild environment in such a big way. It's the first thing that you experience, and with it being so, it's going to have a heavy effect on informing the player about the tone of the game, and honestly, it does it phenomenally. The Plateau highlights the two biggest things you'll do in this game: discover and explore. Those are the constants of this game, and the environment is constantly changing, making areas feel new and different, and always adding in ideas that make it so interesting or pique the player's interest. The eeriness you feel walking through the fields where only monsters rule in this barren land with no life really makes you feel the emptiness and the low that Hyrule has gone to. Especially so if you played some other game in the franchise like Ocarina of Time, where Hyrule Castletown is so lively and filled and energetic. It's a big change of pace from that kind of mood. And like I said, there's an entire environment section in the forest which you don't really even have to touch, but there's a stone talus there, and that introduces you to the boss fight. Yes, the stone talus is a very weak enemy in the Breath of the Wild game, but it's still super hard to fight in this early stage. You start to learn that each boss is different. They have their certain weaknesses, they have their certain weak points. You'll start to learn how to adapt and find out these weaknesses while in battle. This music has this ambient touch, which makes you feel intact with the wilderness around you. It really makes you feel calm and steady, like the wildlife around you doesn't know that everything's bad, only the people. The game overall just has a great environment. It's the reason you feel so immersed in the world. The plateau just added to this because it really made the world feel vacant, and in doing so, when you do finally get to go to different villages, you feel relieved that there's life. You feel relieved that there's other people on your journey. It's not just you. One thing I did want to touch on real quick while we're kind of in this section is just how the plateau is in the DLC for the game, Master Mode. I'm actually going to bring on the other member of this channel, Geo, and he's going to talk a little bit about that.
One thing I wanted to touch on real quick as well would be how Master Mode makes this beginning segment so enjoyable for future playthroughs. The added difficulty that the game gets when you have nothing and all the monsters are stronger than you can imagine, while also regenerating health during this opening segment, makes it so you have to play the game differently. You can't really fight because your weapons don't last and aren't that strong, so it makes you take on an almost more stealthy route and kind of avoid fights at the beginning until you have a good amount of health. It's very different than the base game's plateau. Not to mention the Master Mode also adds a Lionel to the plateau just to spite you.
The Great Plateau is a really well-crafted experience for the player. If you got to this point in the video, I hope you understand at least why I think the Plateau is the perfect tutorial for a game like Breath of the Wild. From the player to experience everything as Link and really building that bond with him, to cook your first spicy pepper meal. There's so much depth to the starting area, and you can tell that the developers spent a lot of time strategically thinking about where to place certain things. Now, I think that the Tears of the Kingdom did a good job with theirs, but I do feel like it dragged on a little more, and it didn't feel as engaging to the player. The Great Plateau is something game developers need to experience and find a way to replicate in their game or genre that they're trying to tackle. There's a lot to learn from it, and it's one of the strongest parts of all of Breath of the Wild. And as always, thank you for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you listening to what I had to say, and I hope to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Once again, this has been the Pixel Critics signing off.